Hello, I'm Mendocino County Sheriff Tom Allman, and as Sheriff, I'm also the Coroner of Mendocino County. In March of 2018, a tragedy occurred in Mendocino County. A vehicle with 2 adults and 6 children plunged off the cliff into the Pacific Ocean, and there were no survivors. As the Coroner of Mendocino County, it is my legal responsibility to make sure that the final government documentation, the death certificate, is as accurate as possible when filed. I have called for a coroner's inquest to be conducted and investigate the facts involving this tragedy. With that in mind, I have called for a coroner's inquest to be assembled. A coroner's inquest is a panel of 12 citizen jurors who will hear all the factual evidence and make a final determination on the cause of death in this tragic case. The coroner's inquest will include the presentation of evidence as well as the testimony of many witnesses. Some of the witnesses are experts in their chosen field. The inquest will also include a chronological order of the Hart family moving from state to state, as well as a chronological order of the route that the Hart family took when traveling from Washington to Mendocino County, and ultimately to their death. Our investigation included contacting many government entities, but I certainly want to thank the Clark County Sheriff's Office in Washington and the California Highway Patrol for their steadfast assistance in obtaining the facts of this case. I would like to thank the many government entities who assisted us in our investigation in our quest to know the truth.
All set. Thank you. Good morning. We are on the record in the matter of the deaths of Jennifer Hart, Sarah Hart, Marcus Hart, Jeremiah Hart, Abigail Hart, Sierra Hart, Hannah Hart, and Devontae Hart. Please, it's very important that all cell phones be turned off, all electronic devices be turned off. By California rules of court, this matter cannot be recorded under any circumstances without the permission of the presiding judge. In this case, the presiding judge has given permission for the videotaping in this court, but no one else has permission to videotape, audio tape, or anything. Very important that be complied with. All right, we have the 14 jurors in place. Yesterday we had jury selection. We have 14 jurors in place. This matter is a formal coroner's inquest, and it is an inquiry into the death and deaths of 8 individuals. My name is Matthew Guichard. I'm the hearing officer who's been retained by the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office to conduct this particular hearing. I have, I'd say, somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 coroner's inquests that I've conducted over the course of the past few years. By law in the state of California, the coroner, the county coroner, the sheriff coroner can order an inquiry into the death of an individual, and it's quite appropriate in this particular case that the sheriff of Mendocino County has ordered that an inquiry into these deaths take place. I do want to emphasize that this hearing is not adversarial, and what that means is there won't be lawyers standing up and objecting or anything such as that. At least we hope so. But at any rate, I'm going to be asking all the questions here today, and I will conduct this. I've read a very comprehensive investigation of this matter, a number of reports, and I'm in a position to ask the questions of the various witnesses. I'm going to plow a little ground that we already plowed yesterday with the jury. I want to remind them, and also for the record, I'm going to read off the witness list that I've decided we're going to call based on the information that they have. I want to reread it. We're going to call Officer M. Covington from the California Highway Patrol, Officer A. Sanchez from the California Highway Patrol, Deputy R. Julian of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, J. Cheney, Search and Rescue of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, Dr. Greg D. Pizarro, a medical doctor, a forensic pathologist who conducted a number of autopsies on some of those names that I mentioned when I first announced the case. Detective A. Beck of the Clark County Sheriff's Office, and that's in Washington State. Officer T. Roloff of the California Highway Patrol, a mate officer, and you'll find out what mate means when he testifies. Investigator Jay Slates of the California Highway Patrol, the Investigative Services Unit, and Lieutenant Shannon Barney of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. Now, members of the jury, as I mentioned yesterday, you may be hearing a number of other names of witnesses or officers, people involved. In a coroner's inquest such as this, we allow hearsay, so in some cases, I'll be asking a witness to testify as to what they know and then perhaps what else they've heard from another officer or relying on other reports, and there's nothing unusual about that at all. As I said, I'll be calling the appropriate witnesses as the hearing officer, and I'll be asking all the questions. These hearings are open to the public. So coroner's inquests under the government code are open to the public. We don't exclude anyone. So the public is invited. The media certainly is invited, and I'm aware that some media people are here today. Friends and family, oftentimes, of people that I've mentioned who are decedents in this particular case are invited to attend. There's nothing unusual about anyone. With that in mind, though, I want to indicate what I said yesterday. It's very important that we keep the appearance of propriety, and so we don't want the appearance of impropriety, and what that means is please have no contact with anyone in the audience, and in the audience, please have no contact with anyone on the jury or witnesses during the course of this, other than a polite hello. But even if you're talking about matters, such mundane matters as the baseball season is starting or something, I would ask you please not to do that, because that does potentially give the appearance of impropriety, and the jurors are going to decide this case based only on the evidence that comes in from the stand in this case and various exhibits that we will have marked. A couple of them are up here, and we'll have a number of them over the course of this. And we never want to have what we call normally the 13th juror. In this case, we've impaneled 14 jurors. That's not alternates. We're going to have 14 jurors, and I'll just remind you that the government code allows in a coroner's inquest anywhere from 9 to 15 jurors. And I say in excess of caution, we have chosen 14 jurors, just in case somebody gets sick, something happens, that we always have the appropriate number that we need. All right. Your contact for all purposes will be Mr. Biggs here, Cynthia Bartley of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, or Sergeant Snitches. And so if anything arises, anything unusual, or you need anything, please contact them. And during the course of this hearing, those are the people you talk to. So as I say, if there's something important that needs to come to my attention, you contact them and bring it to my attention. We have you seated in the order almost that we had yesterday. We have the same 14. We've made a couple of little changes. But I'm going to refer to, if I have to, and I don't think that I will, by the number that you're seated in. And it will be the same as yesterday. So juror number 7, who was number 7 yesterday, is number 7 today, even though juror number 7 is sitting in a different seat. As I said, we are going to take yesterday, and I'll just for the audience, we'll take breaks generally every hour on the hour. We try to do that as best we can, and that accommodates witnesses. It certainly accommodates the juror. And most importantly, it accommodates the court reporter. So what I like to say when I ask people to turn off all their devices, we have a very competent court reporter who is taking down everything that is being said here when I say we're on the record. So when you heard me say on the record, that is the cue for the court reporter to start, excuse me, taking down everything that is said. And when I say we're off the record, she stops. We also have, this matter is being, my understanding, videotaped and live streamed, and the same would apply when I say we're on the record. That is the cue for the videographer to start videotaping. When I say we're off the record, the same. Under the court order from the presiding judge in this particular case, and it certainly is appropriate, she has directed that no jurors are to be identified by name on the record, and no jurors are to be identified by having discussions and identified. So if anything were to happen and I needed to discuss with someone, I would indicate to the videographer that we need to go, at least for the videographer, to go off the record, even though the court reporter would remain on the record. I don't anticipate that will happen, but potentially it will. Having said all that, we will take those breaks as appropriate, but as I mentioned yesterday, if we have finished up with somebody, say, at 10 minutes to the hour or so, and I think it's appropriate that we take the break at that time, we'll do that. And for you as jurors, if some emergency comes up or some reason that you need to take a quick break, just raise your hand, let me know, and we can take a break at that time. We'll go off the record. Again, if any of you have any issues, back problems or anything, and you need to stand at various times and stretch your back, that's totally appropriate. Go ahead and feel free to do that. All right. As I mentioned, that witness list and I thought I'd just tell the jury how we're going to proceed today. And for the record, I'm going to initially call some of the first responders, and I mentioned the names from the Highway Patrol of Covington and Sanchez, and then we will call Deputy R. Julian from the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, kind of to set the stage of this incident for you as jurors to see what went on. Eventually then we'll move into the search and rescue person, Mr. Cheney, and give you a sense of the comprehensiveness of the search that went on for some significant period of time in this particular matter. And I say search, meaning for items that were swept out to sea or came up on the beach, as well as decedents' bodies or parts of them. So, and then we will move on. I'm not sure how it's going to work because we have some scheduling issues, but we will call Dr. Pizarro, who will testify from a medical standpoint as to autopsies. We'll call Deputy Beck from Washington State, who will talk about issues that relate to what happened in Washington State with the Hart family. And I want to say, for the record, I'll be calling it the Hart family rather than each individual, except when we're talking about each individual, perhaps during the time that I'm mentioning with Dr. Pizarro and his testimony. We'll then call the mate officer from the Highway Patrol, Officer Roloff, who will talk about a number of interesting scientific things relating to the vehicle speeds and things such as that. We will then call Officer Jay Slates of the California Highway Patrol, who conducted a comprehensive investigation, and he's the witness who will frankly be probably on the stand the longest of anyone. And then we will finish up with Lieutenant Barney of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office for a number of issues to kind of close things out. So that's just to give you an understanding of what we're going to do over the course of this matter. I think we mentioned the schedule yesterday. I'm going to try very much. I like to start right at 9 o'clock each morning. I indicated to you we will go in most cases till 5 o'clock. But again, if we've finished up with somebody and it's 4:45 or something like that, I think it makes sense to move into the next day and start. We'll do that. Lunch will be generally from 12 to 1:30. So that's our schedule. I anticipate we will have all the evidence in before you not later than the first part of Friday morning, perhaps earlier, perhaps a little later. And I'll read the instructions that I have prepared. As I mentioned, we will have the jury instructions. By law, I have to read them out loud, but you will each have a copy of them in your hands when I read them, and then you will have a copy of them, each of you, during deliberations. And those instructions, among other things, are the definitions of the 4 modes or manners of death that we have in the state of California under law. All right, as I mentioned, this is going to be your courtroom for all purposes. The witness will be seated over here. Very important, as I mentioned yesterday, you as the trier of fact and the court reporter need to hear what the witnesses have to say. So if there are any issues and you can't hear, please just raise your hand and let me know so that we can have the witness talk a little louder or repeat whatever. What happens oftentimes is because I'm asking the question, the witness will turn towards me, and sometimes the jurors can't. So let's all work together kind of to remind each other and make sure that you as jurors can hear everything that is said here today. All right. In an inquest such as this, as I said, I'm asking all the questions. In many cases, and I'm aware in this case, there are many interested parties, some of them professional. That means attorneys perhaps from the county counsel's office or various agencies. I'm not really aware of that. But I don't want you to think it's unusual if you see someone passing a note to Mr. Biggs, our court attendant, and then he'll pass that note up to me. That is not an invitation for everyone in the audience to hand me notes. That is an invitation for people in professional capacity to hand me notes. And I will review those notes and determine whether, for the purposes of an inquest, they are relevant. And I'll have to say that sometimes I'm asked questions or I get a note that is not particularly relevant, but generally you will not know if it's relevant or whether I read it or not, because it's usually just within the process of the questioning. But I say that because it's not unusual, and I don't want anyone to think it's problematic or unusual. As we saw during jury selection yesterday, occasionally Mr. Biggs will whisper in my ear, "You forgot to say a name," and he did that twice yesterday. That won't happen again because I have that name written right down right here on my sheet. But that's not unusual. All right. Let's talk just a little bit before we get started with the witnesses about your role as jurors. And as we mentioned yesterday, in the state of California, there are only 4 possible modes of death by law in the state of California. And I'm going to read them to you again. One is natural causes, one is accident, one is suicide, and one is at the hands of another other than by accident. You'll be asked at the end of the evidence to determine which of those 4 applies to each one of the decedents, and only one applies. So we'll get into that at some point. I'll go over it when I instruct you, and we'll talk about the actually verdict forms. But what you will have in this case is 4 verdict forms for each decedent. So you're going to have 32 verdict forms. And those 4 verdict forms, each one will be of the 4 modes. So you will decide independently as jurors which of the 4 modes applies, which one applies to each one of the decedents in this case, and that's going to be part of your task. At the end of the evidence, I'll instruct you on the law, and that will include the definitions of those modes. Let me caution you, however, at this point. You will not be asked, nor is it relevant for this type of hearing, to determine either civil or criminal responsibility on the part of anyone, not the decedents, not anyone. So that will be your role. And as I've indicated, a coroner's inquest is designed to put out into the open the circumstance of a death or deaths. And so the evidence that I will be calling and bringing will give you an overview of not just the incident itself, but the background and all, which will allow you as jurors to make a determination as to those modes, perhaps motives, various things that will come into this situation. My final mention to you is going to be related to taking notes. You're certainly allowed to take notes, and I notice some of you are already taking notes. You all have notepads in your hands. I like to always caution people, however, and sometimes people are so anxious to take down their notes and look at their notebooks that sometimes they don't focus on jurors. And the important thing, on witnesses, and the important thing in a matter such as this is to listen to what the jurors have to say. So that doesn't mean you can't take notes. You certainly can take notes and take them. However, at the end of the day, when you are deliberating and you have notes in your hand, your notes are for your own personal help in recalling and remembering, not to be used to remind another juror. So each person has notes, because sometimes what we want is people to use their own recollection. You as human beings have your own experience and in listening to, and so I don't want to say don't take notes, but I do want to say caution everyone in reliance on your own personal notes. That's fine during the course of this particular inquest. All right, what I'm going to do at this point is call our first witness, and I'm going to call Officer Covington of the California Highway Patrol. Raise your right hand, please. Do you affirm you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please be seated. State your name and spell your name for the record.
Officer Michael Covington, Michael, and Covington, Covington.
All right, and it's apparent, but I'd like you to state for the record what your occupation is, please.
I am an officer of the California Highway Patrol. I've been an officer for nearly 4 years now.
All right, and could you tell us just a little bit of your background, training, and experience as it relates to being a Highway Patrol officer?
So I attended the academy. I started the academy in December of 2014. That was a 27-week academy. Since then, I have had nearly 4 years of on-the-job experience. I've also attended an intermediate accident investigation course, which is a post-certified course that they conduct at the academy. And then prior to the academy, I had approximately 1 year of college for criminal justice.
All right. Can you tell us on, I guess, March 26th of this past year, 2018, what was your assignment?
On March 26th, I was a patrol officer with my partner, Officer Sanchez. She was with me that day. We were just the only unit on duty for the Mendocino coast area.
All right. And you say your partner, were you a field training officer that particular day?
Yes, sir.
All right. And just explain to the jury what's a field training officer.
So once you graduate the academy, you have 187 hours of field training, which is on-the-job training where you ride with the senior officer so they can watch over you, make sure you are doing everything appropriately.
And you were watching over Officer Sanchez, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. So she was in the same patrol car as you?
Yes, sir.
All right. All right. You say you were, your beat area was the Mendocino coast?
Yes, sir.
All right. And, all right, if you wouldn't mind just, and I'm going to kind of get into it now, I do want to say that I think I mentioned yesterday that in a coroner's inquest, I oftentimes ask for a narrative, and a narrative is something meaning that I can just ask the witness to give a little bit of a story rather than the kind of stilted sometimes question and answer, and then what happened, and then what happened. So I'm going to ask Officer Covington to just give us a little narrative of what he initially was dispatched to, what he heard by way of dispatch, which caused him to respond to an incident near Westport on that particular day. So if you wouldn't mind just...
All right, so on March 26th, it was approximately 3:43 in the afternoon. I received a call from our dispatch. The call was a vehicle that was spotted at the base of a cliff up north, up by the San Juan Bridge. At 3:43, me and Officer Sanchez, we were busy with an unrelated incident, and we weren't able to respond immediately. We concluded our duties with the unrelated incident at approximately 16:32, and then responded to the vehicle that was over the cliff.
I'm going to stop you there just for a minute and say, some people weren't in the military or don't understand military time. So if you if you wouldn't mind telling the jury what I actually know, but tell the jury what 16:32 is.
So 4:32 in the afternoon,
right,
was when we concluded the other incident, and we then responded to San Juan Bridge for the vehicle. We arrived at the scene at 5:27 in the afternoon. The scene was a large dirt turnout that was on the west side of Highway 1. And the photographs there.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, officer, if you could stand up and stand on this side so the jury can see, and just you can use a pointer if you like, or just your hand, and indicate to the jury. I think that's the bridge you just mentioned, is that right?
Right, this is the San Juan Bridge here. We arrived and pulled into this turnout here, which at the time was filled with emergency personnel fire trucks mostly. And so upon our arrival, we were told by fire personnel that they had already been down to the vehicle. They had accessed the vehicle by walking in from the north through this way. The vehicle was located down here, as you can see over here. They walked in through the north, which at the time that they walked through was they told me approximately knee-deep water. However, by the time that we got there, you couldn't really access through this way without you would be fully swimming in the surf at that time.
I'm going to stop you just for a minute, and we're going to, that I believe is pre-marked Exhibit 1. All right. So the officer is indicating on Exhibit 1. I know it's a little difficult for the court reporter to take down when we say we went around from here, but I think, so indicating that to the left on the photograph, that's where access was along the beach, and it shows some beach area, but what you've indicated is by the time you arrived, that beach area was covered with water. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Thank you. Then you can continue.
So the only way that you could safely access the vehicle was to rappel down, and it was roughly somewhere in this general area here. They had a rappel line going down. However, for the CHP, I haven't been trained for rappelling, so I wasn't unable to go down to the vehicle. So the on-scene fire, they told me that there were 2 people that were still trapped inside the vehicle and 3 others that were outside, 2 of which were located near the vehicle within the rocks here, and one had washed further down the beach, and she was down here laying in the surf. So we then requested for a helicopter to come because they were having, the fire personnel were having difficulties getting the individuals back up from the base of the cliff. So CHP helicopter H-14 responded to the scene. They arrived at approximately 1800 hours, and then they used the...
And that's 6 o'clock?
Yes, sorry.
All right, no problem.
At 6 o'clock p.m. They utilized the helicopter, and they brought up the 3 individuals that were outside of the vehicle. They attempted to extricate the other 2 individuals from the vehicle. However, it was upside down and in the surf and at the base of the cliff, so they were limited on tools that they could have down there, so they were unable to get the other 2 out of the vehicle. So after the helicopter picked up the other 3, we then had a tow truck respond to the scene. Fort Bragg Towing first responded to the scene with it's a pretty typical size tow truck. I believe it's an F550. It's the typical AAA ones that you would see. They attempted to bring the vehicle up, but the truck wasn't strong enough because it was basically pulling it straight up the cliff. So at that point, we had to request for what we call a big rig tow truck. It's a full-size semi-truck, which was all-in-one towing. They responded from the Ukiah area.
I'm going to interrupt you just for a minute, just so the jury can get a sense. So obviously this took some considerable time, is that correct? Can you give us, the jury, just a little sense of from the time that you arrived to the helicopter arrived and then the truck arrived? And it doesn't have to be precise, but just give a sense.
Right, so the helicopter arrived at approximately 6 p.m. It took them, I don't have the exact times, but roughly 2 hours or so to remove the 3 individuals from the base. And then Fort Bragg Towing tried for some time to remove the vehicle and were unable to. Then the big rig tow arrived at 9:39 p.m. and began lifting the vehicle out. That was done. Firemen had to rappel down to hook up the tow cables to the vehicle, and that took a considerable amount of time as well. I don't have the exact time that we left, but I believe it was somewhere around midnight was when the vehicle was finally pulled up and taken out.
All right, and you indicated before that there were 2 individuals inside the vehicle when they were attempting to pull the vehicle up. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And once the vehicle was pulled up, did you observe any individual within the truck yourself?
By the time the vehicle was pulled up, there was 1 individual remaining in the vehicle. The other individual, as the truck was being pulled up, came out of the vehicle, and she was now down in the rocks. Mm-hmm. So the vehicle got pulled up with the passenger. The driver was the one that fell out. Okay. Which was Jennifer. Mm-hmm.
So and did you identify
not at
anyone
that time.
Yourself? Or
not at that time, no.
You heard from somebody else that the driver had been identified as Jennifer?
At a later time, right.
All right, and that's certainly appropriate. You can testify to that. So it's your understanding that the driver of that vehicle had fallen out, but a passenger still remained in the vehicle. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that passenger was identified as whom?
Sarah.
All right. Where was she located when you observed her in the vehicle?
She was in the passenger seat, which was... The roof was pretty much caved in and it was leaned back pretty far. Actually, I'm not sure. It was kind of hard to tell with the damage with the vehicle on exactly where she was located. It was the passenger seat was kind of smashed down completely, so she was somewhat in the passenger area.
All right. And it may sound like an unusual question, but fair to say that everyone there at the scene, that the people that were recovered by the helicopter and the driver and the passenger were all dead.
Correct.
All right. All right. So you left the scene, you say, approximately midnight?
Approximately, yes.
All right. And just tell us from a patrol officer standpoint, what were you doing during the time besides making observations? Were you cataloging things? What precisely were you doing? Just to let the jury know.
We searched the scene pretty extensively for any indications of why the vehicle may have gotten down there or how the vehicle may have gotten down there. We were unable to locate any kind of what you would typically see as tire tracks. If somebody had lost control while driving on the highway, you would typically see tire tracks going off or something. There was nothing of that to indicate exactly how the vehicle had gotten down there. We were at that time kind of unsure of what exactly had happened.
Mhm.
So that was mostly what we were doing. We were also just kind of obtaining statements from firemen regarding what they saw upon their arrival.
All right. And as the FTO officer, were you having your partner, Officer Sanchez, write, I'd say, put paper on this and write some of those reports related to interviews of police and fire?
That was the initial plan. However, CHP Sergeant Morales responded to the scene, and we ended up turning the investigation over to MATE.
Okay. All right.
The multidisciplinary accident investigation team. So they ended up writing the report on it.
All right. And so now you've heard what MATE stands for, multi-agency.
Multidisciplinary accident investigation.
All right. So we'll hear from a MATE officer at some point during the course of the week. All right. And just in looking at Exhibit 1 there that you have identified as the area of the bridge and that large turnout, and then over to the right is Exhibit 2. And can you just describe what that is in relation to Exhibit 1? Just so the jury understands, it's a...
So the rocks, the vehicle's right up here, the rocks are down here. That is roughly this vicinity right here, the heavily rocky area. This vehicle is facing southerly, so it's laying here, kind of facing this direction down the beach. So we were standing roughly right around here looking down at the vehicle.
All right, kind of where that big dark spot is on the on Exhibit 1, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, and got just a couple more questions for you. Can you describe in that big turnout area in Exhibit 1, right as it's close to the cliff, it seems that there's kind of a darker area all the way around. Is there some kind of a berm or something on that?
There is a slight raised berm on the edges of it, and the dark is the grass there.
All right. If you wouldn't mind just telling how you say slight raised berm, how just give us an estimate.
I would estimate about 18 inches tall, a rounded berm, 1 foot to 18 inches or so.
All right. So 18 inches, 1 foot to 18, that's, say, a slight berm. That seems that's a significant amount. So if it's 18 inches if a vehicle were just accidentally left in neutral and perhaps rolled, would that berm, or could you tell it seems to be significant enough that somebody would have to accelerate to get over it? Is that correct?
I couldn't say for sure. I would assume so, but I'm not sure on that.
Right, okay. The important thing is the size of the berm that I want the jury to understand, and perhaps I'm a question for somebody else, but I do appreciate that. Let me ask you, were you present for the recovery of the remains of the driver, Jennifer Hart?
Yes.
Okay, and how was that accomplished?
That was accomplished with the Fort Bragg Fire Department used ropes and winches, and one individual went down and put her into a basket and then used a winch and pulled her back up.
I see. And you were present for that, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. In terms of the examination, so there were lots of fire and personnel in that turnout area when you arrived, is that right?
Correct.
So in your examination, looking around and looking for anything that might indicate, as you say, tire marks or anything to lose control, you weren't able to observe any, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Any other evidence that you actually saw at the scene yourself or recovered, anything, credit cards, driver's licenses, anything such as that?
Nothing from the top, no. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was items in the vehicle once it was pulled up, receipts and such that we looked at. I did not collect any of it, though.
All right. All right. Is there anything else you'd like to offer here today, Officer Covington, as to your observations when you responded to the scene?
No, nothing that I could think of right now. Just I guess that it was I've responded to quite a few collisions on the coast area and vehicles down the cliffs, and it was very unusual to have no evidence of any kind to indicate of why it went down the cliff.
Mhm.
It was definitely out of the ordinary.
I see. And out of the ordinary because there was nothing that you saw that indicated anything by way of skid marks or anything such as that. Is that what you mean?
Right.
All right. All right. Thank you very much. You may step down. And you can remain, all witnesses can remain in the courtroom during the course of this. I am going to next call Officer Sanchez. Raise your right hand, please. You affirm you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Please be seated. State your name. Spell your name for the record, please.
Annabelle Sanchez Corral. ANABELSANCHEZ
And can you tell us your occupation, please?
Yes, I'm an officer with the California Highway Patrol.
And how long have you been with the Highway Patrol?
Over a year.
All right. I'm going to ask you to speak up just a little bit. We have been advised that that particular microphone, I don't want to say doesn't work very well. It doesn't work at all. So it's important that we speak out so that the jury can hear precisely what is being said here today as well as the live feed. So,
Yes.
And people can remind me and I'll remind the witnesses, and we'll do that kind of as a team effort over the course of this. All right. Give the jury some background training experience as it relates to you being a California Highway Patrol officer, and also any post-high school education. Let them know that as well.
Yes, so I attended the California Highway Patrol Academy. It was a 27-week course. Graduated January 5th of last year. Prior to the academy, I completed my statistics degree, Bachelor's of Science, with the University of California, Riverside.
All right. And as with Officer Covington, part of your academy training with the Highway Patrol is accident investigation. Is that correct?
Yes,
So you went through that basic kind of training?
correct.
All right. And on that particular day, we understand from Officer Covington, you were riding with him. Were you driving the patrol car?
Yes, I was.
Is that how it works when you're in FTO training, you get to drive?
That's correct.
All right. And, all right, so we've heard from Officer Covington that, in fact, you were dispatched, you had some other detail you completed, and then you arrived at the scene. So what I'm going to do is just ask you to, some of it, I'm sure, is going to be repetitious, but basically from you initially, and the reason I've called you is I saw that you put, as I call it, some pen to paper, and tell us what your initial observations were when you arrived at the scene there
Okay.
at Westport.
Yes, so we arrived at approximately 5:27. At the time, the scene was packed with firemen. There's multiple fire trucks on scene.
Let me stop you there. Just give the jury just give them an understanding. Just give us an approximation. How many vehicles did you see in that turnout area, emergency vehicles?
I believe it was more than 4.
Okay, all right. And lots of people
Correct.
up there. When you arrived, did you see anyone down in the water near that vehicle?
Very possible. I don't remember
Okay.
whether or not there was at the time.
Mhm.
But I know there was a lot of people trying to communicate with each other, with us.
All right.
Mhm.
What did you understand your initial assignment was? And I understand from Officer Covington that eventually the mate people came in, or somebody from mate, and took over.
Correct. My understanding was that I was going to complete the investigation for the accident.
And then after some period of time,
Right.
It
It
was
was
determined-
delegated to the mate department.
all right.
Mhm.
All right, so at that incident, you made these observations. What did you specifically do yourself?
Yes, well, I tried to relay information from one officer to the other. Tried to write down the fire personnel that was on scene that could help us in providing statements according to their observations for our future report. things of that nature.
All right. And so fair to say you stayed there with Officer Covington all the way till
That's correct.
late into the night?
Yes. So we were there until basically all the bodies were recovered. The vehicle was recovered, and I completed the CHP 180 form for storing the vehicle for
Okay.
evidence.
Yeah, and so that's a standard CHP form, a 180 form. Can you tell the jury so that is to take the truck in, excuse me,
Possession of-
the vehicle, to impound it
Correct.
for investigative purposes?
Correct.
All right.
Right.
And so, so it's not just towed to the nearest gas station, it's taken into custody, is that right?
That's right. It was taken into custody, and we note who the owners are, any damage, inventory, whatever is inside the vehicle as well.
All right. And is that part of the 180 form? Do you put down the information? So did you gather information as to the registered owners of that vehicle?
Yes.
And do you recall who that vehicle was registered to? This isn't a test here today. I wonder if you
Right.
happen to know. We certainly have lots of information from others, but I thought perhaps if you filled out the 180 form.
I did. Obviously, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, that's all
But I
right.
believe it was to the party involved.
I see. All right. And then whatever other information about the vehicle, then you put it on that 180
Correct.
form, and the vehicle is then impounded. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was the vehicle taken from the scene while you were present at the scene?
Yes, it was taken to all-in-one towing yard, to
I
their
see.
yard.
All right. And with respect to the tasks of interviewing firefighters and identifying them, you accomplished that, and then at some point passed the job over to
Yes.
a mate investigator? Is that
Yes.
correct? All right. And with respect to when you arrived, somewhere around the neighborhood of, what was it, 5:30, something like that,
Yes, 527.
in March, was it light out at that time, do you recall?
When we arrived, yes, but it was still daylight.
But getting darker, so over the
Correct.
course of the evening, getting darker and darker?
Yes, yeah. At the time, I remember it was an urgency to get the helicopter on scene so that we could recover the deceased bodies.
Uh-huh. And were there emergency lights that were put up by the fire department or anyone so that the scene could
Yes,
be
there was.
illuminated? All
Once
right,
once
all
it
right,
became more dark.
all right. And as I'm so that the jury knows, and the reason why some of these questions are just to kind of give you a picture, as I say, of precisely what was going on in these recovery efforts, at least initially right there at the scene. All right, officer. Anything else that you'd like to add that you can think of that you were involved with, other than what Officer Covington has already mentioned with respect to his duties?
No, sir.
All right. Thank you. You may step down. You can
Thank you.
remain if you like. Yeah, I think that it's appropriate. And this is precisely where we talked. So we're 10 minutes to the hour. We're going to be calling Deputy Julian from the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, but it only makes sense to take our break. It's precisely by this clock, and that's the clock we'll use, 10 minutes to the hour. Please be in your seats in the jury box at 5 minutes after the hour, and we're going to begin precisely at 5 after the hour, and we are off the record. Call up Deputy R. Julian of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. A couple of things. I just want to, excuse me, we're on the record in the matter, the Hart inquest. I want to clarify a couple of things. So as to jurors, that admonition that I read yesterday, and I know it was yesterday, but the admonition is you are not to discuss the case with anyone or even among yourselves until the matter is submitted to you. So I know it's always of interest. Gosh, look what happened. What do you think of that guy? Just don't do that, please. And you can talk about it when you're all together during deliberations, because that's what deliberations are. But we're not there yet. So nobody's in trouble, but I just want to make sure that everyone understands. Number two, with respect to contact anyone from the audience, that's called the bar in this justice court, and so we should not have anyone passing that bar without permission of the bailiff or anyone such as that. And if anyone needs to make contact with me or thinks it's important, who's not in some profession, they should contact either the bailiff, Sergeant Schnitzes, or Mr. Biggs here, and indicate that, and he'll probably solve whatever issues you have. So I just want to let that. The final issue is, I know we have a number of exhibits that people are very interested in. They're a little bit far away from the jury. We have what we call oftentimes is publishing something to the jury. And publishing to the jury means oftentimes we'll hand photographs to the jury. What I'm going to do right at this time is have Mr. Biggs, I'm going to call it publish exhibit number 1 to you. I'm going to have him just walk slowly in front of you as jurors so that those of you a little far away can actually look a little closer at it. And I will also say that we're marking these and we're going to introduce them into evidence. And so during the time of your deliberation, you're going to have all of these in the jury room so that you can look at them. So for the record, he is showing exhibit number 1, publishing exhibit number 1 to the jury. And publishing also is not a time for people to make comments or ask questions. It's simply that Mr. Biggs is going to show that to you. And it wouldn't offend me if he made a kind of a slow turn and came up here so that people in the audience perhaps can take a very quick look. And I'm going to say for the record that exhibit number 1 is now officially in evidence. All right, let's show then exhibit number 2, and I would like, it's my understanding exhibit 2 does have a picture of the vehicle that's down the cliff, is that correct? Yeah, all right, then that's the reason we'll show that, and we'll publish that as well. It's not mine. We'll say why, while Mr. Biggs is showing that I have allowed certain professionals who have to be in communication for obvious reasons to have their phones, such as that, on silent, because some communication is critically important. So somebody's not violating my order, I just want to say that's certainly appropriate. All right, I'm going to call Deputy R. Julian from the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. Please come forward. Raise your right hand, please. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Please be seated. State your name. Spell your name for the record, please.
Robert Julian, R-O-B-E-R-T-J-U-L-I-A-N.
Can you tell us your occupation, please?
Deputy Sheriff for the County of Mendocino.
And if you wouldn't mind, just do kind of as I asked the Highway Patrol officers. Give us a little bit of your background, training, and experience, specifically as it relates to being a deputy sheriff training.
All right.
And if you have any education that's relevant after high school, let us know.
Sure. So I attended a post-certified law enforcement academy. I was hired with the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office in 2015, and I attended a 16-week field training program. Passed that, and since that time I've conducted over 60 death investigations and received various training from more senior deputies and more experienced deputies.
All right. What was your specific assignment on July 26th of this last year, 2018?
Respond up to a fatal traffic collision and perform coroner duties.
All right. And so as part of your duties as a deputy with Mendocino, you do not only investigations and various patrol, but you also do coroner's duties. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Tell the jury what that involves.
You're arriving at the scene of deaths, whether they're homicides, suicides, and basically determining what they are and the appropriate resources for it. So if it's, a suspicious homicide, we call it our detectives. If it's a suicide, sometimes we call it detectives. Otherwise, if it's a natural death, we usually call the mortuary and have them come and take the deceased.
All right. And this was March 26th of 2018?
Yes.
All right. Well, tell us then, let's get to that particular date, and you were dispatched to this incident, is that correct?
Yes.
Approximately what time were you dispatched?
I believe it was about 4:30.
All right.
Yeah.
And it came through, is there a central dispatch that has highway patrol? And
It was actually my day off, so I heard my coworker going to it, and I called in and volunteered to go to it.
All right. So, and what did you hear that caused you to call in and go to the scene?
All of my partners, the day shift and night shift, were responding to a shooting in Gualala, so no one was available to take this. So it was my day off and didn't have anything going on.
All right. And so your response was because there was a report of a vehicle that was in the water at somewhere near Westport, is that right?
Yes.
All right. Well, tell us a little more specifically about what you heard. What was the dispatch that you responded to?
It first initially came out as a 2-person fatal collision, and then while I was responding to it, it came out as a 5-person fatal traffic collision.
All right. And so you responded to that. Approximately what time did you arrive at the scene?
15 minutes after CHP, I believe it was about 5:42.
All right. So when you arrived at the scene, just give the jury a general sense of what you observed, what you did.
CHP was there, Westport Fire, and the air helicopter had just gotten there. So there was probably around 8 to 10 emergency vehicles, a bunch of firefighters running around. I got in contact with the Westport fire chief, and he basically told me that there were 2 people in the vehicle deceased and then 3 additional people on the shore, 1 further away like Officer Covington explained. And death was obvious for all of them. They were all cold, rigor mortis. There was also water in the vehicle tire well that was warm, so that kind of indicated that the vehicle had been there for a little bit.
Yeah, let me stop you there. Let's talk about that just a little bit. So, water in the wheel indicating that perhaps the tide had come in and the vehicle had been there for over a tide period,
Right.
something such
Enough
as
to let the water warm, and I mean, the water out here is pretty cold, so for it to get warm, for someone to notice that.
I see. All right, and with respect to your indications as in your role as doing some coroner investigations as well, you indicated you looked at some of the bodies or observed and determined that they had been dead for some period of time, is that right?
Yes.
All right. All right, now with respect to all of these, I'm looking at Westport, Fort Bragg Fire, Cal Fire, a whole bunch of emergency responders were,
Right.
and they were there at the scene when you arrived?
Yes.
All right.
And of course, more arrived over time, but initially.
Gotcha. Well, tell the jury precisely what you did then. What was your role when you first arrived?
So I first grabbed 3 of the body bags that we placed the decedents in, and those were provided to Fort Bragg and Westport firefighters, which they took down to the shore, and then they placed the decedents in the bags, and the CHP air helicopter brought the first 3 up onto the landing there, or the turnout, where I looked at all of them, determined that death was obvious, and attempted to identify them. Unfortunately, there wasn't any identifying information on them. So they were all placed in body bags and labeled as Jane and John Does.
All right. And when you examined them, could you determine whether or not those 3 in those body bags were adults, children, or kids?
Children, all children.
They were all children? All right. And, all right. Then, and were you present then at the time that the vehicle, the subject vehicle that's depicted in Exhibit 2 there, was pulled up from below the cliff?
Yes.
All right. And, all right, can you just tell us your observations? And then you examined 2 individuals that had been in that vehicle. My understanding is one of them.
So I had moved, by the time they started bringing that up, it was really dark. It was, like Officer Covington had said, about 10 o'clock at night. So I moved to a turnout further south, and I turned on all my spotlights on the patrol vehicle to give all the personnel down on the shore some more light for hooking the vehicle up. And I stayed there and I just kind of watched what was happening with the recovery. And with the cliff, basically the vehicle got brought straight up and flipped onto its roof. So unfortunately it got more damaged. And then I saw one of the decedents that was in the driver's seat fall from the vehicle along with a bag that was in the vehicle.
Did you recover that bag?
The next day, Officer Covington found it down on the shore and gave it to me.
All right. And did you examine what was in that bag?
Yes.
And just describe.
Personal identification for Sarah and Jennifer Hart, amongst a cell phone, I think, and flash drives.
All right. And were those ultimately, to whom were those ultimately given?
Officer Slates.
With the California Highway
Yes.
Patrol? All right. So he was the lead investigator of this incident, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. All right. So while you were there, can you just describe for the jury, you said you parked your patrol car. So in Exhibit 1, which is the one to your left.
Yeah, so it would have been a turnout further down, about right here.
Is
And I
that
shined
south
all-
or north?
South.
So in looking at the diagram then, we're looking at
We're looking at north, south, east, west.
Okay. And so to the right, the witness is indicating to the right off that road. And that's Highway 1, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So you parked farther down to assist
There's
with
a
illumination.
turnout. I think this is the road that starts it right here, and it came here and shined all of my patrol vehicle's lights here to illuminate the shore.
All right. And that assisted in the recovery of
Right.
the body, whom you later identified as whom?
That was Jennifer Hart.
All right. All right. And then when the vehicle was brought up, then you went in your role and examined a person that was in the
Passing.
vehicle.
Yeah.
And did you identify that person?
Yes.
And who was that person?
That was Sarah Hart.
Okay, so,
So she was identified from I believe it was Minnesota or Oregon interim driver's license in the glove box. Or no, sorry. Sarah Hart was identified from a Minnesota driver's license that was found in a tide pool by the vehicle and given to me by Officer Covington. And then I found an interim driver's license in the glove box that belonged to Jennifer Hart.
all right. You have photographs that you could look in.
Yes.
And so in looking at the photographs from those licenses, you could readily identify who the 2 individual adults were, is that right?
Correct. I was able to identify Sarah Hart. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to identify Jennifer Hart due to her fall.
I see. So some initial injuries when she fell back onto the rocks, is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. Ultimately, though, at some point you did identify that the driver was Jennifer Hart, is that correct?
I believe that was done through follow-up investigation through the coroner's department.
But you understood that happened, since,
Yeah.
as I say, hearsay is involved. We will have somebody talk about the identification of that, but that's certainly something you can identify because, you can testify to because you were aware that was done.
Right. The vehicle was registered to Sarah and Jennifer Hart, and there was plenty of indicia in there to, suspect that it was their vehicle and that was them in the car.
I see. All right. So I'm looking at that, and you provided 3 body bags for the children. Is that, you normally carry body bags in your vehicle? That's
Yes.
part of your role, and you had 3 of them?
I had 5. I had stopped off at the office and picked up an additional 2.
All right, okay. All right, at some point, I think it was described as a backpack. Is that the bag that fell out?
Yes.
And did you observe that bag fall out when
Yes.
the vehicle was coming up? All right. And that was recovered? And
I
then-
suspect that was a backpack that was recovered the following day.
Yeah. And you got that from Officer Covington?
Yes.
Okay. And examined the contents of that, and as you said, there were some indicia which indicated that the identification of at least one of the individuals.
Both. There were credit cards for Jennifer and Sarah Hart.
Okay. All right. And so I'm looking at later times, because there are a number of reports, and I'm not going to have you go over all of them, but I'm looking at your various reports. This matter went on for some period of time that you were involved in. Gathering information and identifying various people and that kind of thing. At some point, did you have some contact with some individuals who had found some additional remains?
Yes.
All right. Describe that for the jury.
It was approximately 2 weeks later, and we got a report of found human remains on a beach just north of the Juan Creek.
So that's exhibit, if you'd look at it and identify, is that exhibit 3, does it say on that?
Yes.
All right.
Exhibit 3. So the Juan Creek is right here in about, I'd say, quarter to half a mile north. There's a shallow little beach here, and this is where the human remains were discovered.
Okay. And just for the jury, can you identify where the vehicle was initially on that particular?
Right here.
I see. All right.
So this is the Juan Creek. That's where the vehicle, the turnout, that's the bridge, and this is the shoreline.
And ultimately, you responded to the scene?
Yes.
To recover that body?
Yes.
And who was that ultimately identified as?
I believe it was Cecilia Hart.
All right. And
Sarah?
that was,
Was it Sierra? Okay.
that's her name, so it's, is it Sierra?
Yes.
All right, so Sierra Hart was, and that body was was whole, is that correct? In other words, it was,
Yes.
all right.
But I was unable to, well, I'd say whole, but it was devoid of any organic material on the face. So,
All right. And so you recovered that particular body, brought it back to the coroner's office, is that right? And
the mortuary brought it back to the mortuary.
all right. And at some point then, that person was identified, those remains were identified as Sierra Hart.
Yes.
Is all right. So to that point, there had been recoveries then of
6 individuals.
6 individuals. And there was some understanding, is it not, that there were 8 individuals in the vehicle?
Correct.
All right. Did you participate in the recovery of any other remains?
No.
Can you tell us then, just give us a little bit of the background of your continuing investigation? So you were out there at the scene, you remained on the scene while the vehicle was recovered and the various bodies that were at the scene. Later, you participated, it was 3 weeks later, 2 weeks later, in the recovery of Sierra's remains. Other than your other duties, what related to this incident did you do in the interim by way of investigation?
I went up there quite a bit and gave it some extra patrol and continued to look for additional bodies.
All right. And if you wouldn't mind just describing, getting up and describing on Exhibit 2, any points of interest, anything areas that you patrolled for searching for the remaining individuals?
Come out in the turnouts, park, get some binoculars or a telescope, and check out the shoreline here, because this is primarily, you can't get up here unless you walk from a private property. And I accessed the beach down here at the Juan Creek, going through the Fetzer property, and walked along the shoreline.
Find any debris over a period of time? My understanding is a number of things were recovered, not bodies, but different.
Deputy Martin he relayed to me at a later time, I believe it was about a month later, that he had found a shoe with a foot. Well, actually, he had not found it, but it was reported to him. And it was a shoe attached to a pair of jeans with a human foot in it.
All right. And that then subsequently was identified as one of the individuals who had occupied that particular vehicle,
Yes.
correct? All right. All right. All right. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to your testimony here today by way of this initial investigation and what your role was in this particular incident, the Hart incident?
Nope.
All right. Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you.
Thanks. We're next going to call Jay Cheney, the search and rescue from the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. Yeah, let's take a minute. Want to just publish that. I'm going to take a moment and swap a couple of exhibits. I'll swear you. Do you affirm? Raise your right hand, please. Do you affirm you'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay. Please state your name, spell your name for the record.
My name is Jared Cheney, Jared Chaney.
All right, and we're going to take a moment now and swap a couple of exhibits, and then I'm actually going to ask Mr. Biggs to publish Exhibit 3 to the jury just while we're in this.
Okay. The high-tech laser pointer. We shall see, right?
All right. Now, thank you. Can you tell us your occupation, please?
Yes, so I am employed by the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office as a program specialist too. Obviously a self-describing title. One of my many roles is to run the crew of volunteers for the Mendocino County Sheriff Search and Rescue.
All right. And please tell the jury a little bit of your background, training, and experience as it relates to your duties with the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, and then more specifically, your duties in search and rescue.
So I have been with Search and Rescue since 2011. I've been on many hundreds of missions. I took over as the commander of that team back in 2017. I've been running many large-scale searches, well over 100 searches that involve close to 100 different searchers. So a lot of experience with looking for something that is lost, no matter what that is. My educational experience is actually a Bachelor of Arts and a lot of years in healthcare administration. How that doesn't tie in.
All right, and thank you very much. I do want to say for the record that Exhibit 3 is now officially in evidence. It's been published to the jury. All right. We were talking about the Hart incident, and what I'd like to do is have you, in your role as the search and rescue person for the Mendocino, or one of them for this Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, describe your initial assignment, what you did, and then we'll go through. I know there's a timeline and all, and I'd like you, so we're going to spend a little time with Mr. Cheney and going through what actually happened in this comprehensive search. So you can start out with when you initially heard about this and what your assignment was.
So we are always dispatched by the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. So after, as you heard from Deputy Julian, we had a vehicle into the surf. We had an unknown number of missing persons to that point. So our team was tasked. The very next morning, we were called by the Sheriff's Office deputies to say, we need to search this area. It was a weekday, and all of the orange volunteer shirts that you see out there are volunteers. So on a weekday, we were able to get 8 during that first initial hasty search of the area. During that first search, while we were still under the impression that there could be someone in the surf, hopefully alive, that was always our hope, we began searching the area starting about 1.5 miles north of the crash site, clear down to almost 5-6 miles south of the crash site. What we determined on the first day was so much of the shoreline is inaccessible. It is straight cliff with water crashing against the rocks. There's no way to get to that shoreline by foot during typical tides. We were able to search a majority of the accessible shorelines that first day, there on the beaches, through the rocks, and made a plan for future searches in the areas that were tougher to get to.
All right. And in that first, and you used the term hasty search, and I'm assuming what you meant is concerned that there might be people alive and you needed to get out very quickly and see what was happening. Is that correct?
That is correct. Hasty is typically a term. It's not meaning poorly planned or anything like that. It's a term we use in search and rescue for expedient because we need to get there for life-saving efforts. So it is a thorough search done during the original operational periods.
Tell the jury a little bit about what you initially found there at the scene, and I'm assuming that you, in that initial search, you didn't find any bodies to recover or any live people, but you may have found some items, indicia, something such as that.
Absolutely. We found a lot of floating debris, a lot of debris washing up on the shores. We had then contacted the Coast Guard at that stage because they do studies of float analysis. If you drop a buoy into the water and call them 5 days later, they can tell you pretty accurately where that buoy is likely going to be. So we do that same kind of thing with science. If a body were in the water, with the water temperatures as they are, how far would they move in any direction? So all indications from our Coast Guard team said they would be floating toward the south. And so we focused a lot of our efforts there. We did see a lot of floating debris. We staged a lot of spotting scopes, high-powered telescopes on all the bluffs over the areas we could not access to identify floating debris. They were able to read the floor mats off of a matching floor mats floating out in the ocean. It was that level of accuracy we had. So,
all right. And all right, we have a number of exhibits that have been placed up, I think 4, 5, and 6. And if you could explain for the jury what, let's start with Exhibit 4, and it's, I know it's Hart search efforts by operational period. If you could describe for the jury the meaning of that particular diagram and interpret it for them, please.
I'm going to use my high-powered laser pointer. So this is the hasty search we were talking about. This is the day right after the vehicle was recovered that we had 8 search and rescue members searching the cliffs, searching all of the beaches and accessible areas. As further investigations went on and we had more information available, we were starting to be under the impression from our Sheriff's Office allies saying there's probably 8 people, so we need to continue looking for other debris and bodies and floating evidence. So we continued that search. But the second day, because we could not get at those areas, we called Alameda County, who has a very advanced UAS team, an unmanned aerial systems team. Some people use the words drones, we do not, but they're these little unmanned aerial vehicles that they can fly over the cliffs to very closely inspect with high resolution video the beaches that were inaccessible. So we brought in 5 aerial teams. One of them is from our own Mendocino County Sheriffs. We have our own on the SAR team, search and rescue team. So we flew all of this area that we could not get to on the first day with these UAVs or UASs. We also once again searched those same beaches, anything accessible. And what we found, because a lot of the same members were there the second day we were out, it's a brand new beach. Every tide period would reset the beach. You'd search at low tide, you'd find something. You'd search at the next high tide, you'd find brand new things that weren't there when you were there on that very beach the day before. So the beach was changing out. The third operational period was more of the same. We actually brought in, we had 11 on that day. This was getting toward, it was a weekend day at that stage, so we were able to bring in slightly larger numbers of volunteers. We again searched those beaches, focusing on the areas we could get to because we timed it at low tide. So we were able to focus on getting into those cliff areas that weren't inaccessible at high tide. Still, no bodies had been recovered through this stage. We were finding lots of debris. We were identifying a lot of things still out in the waves. It had been a storm right before the incident, so the surf was still pretty rough at that time, but it was getting better on toward operational period 4, the 2nd of April. Operational period 4, we decided that one of the best forms of searching, we had found the most stuff, was with these spotting scopes. We really ramped up going out onto all the bluffs. We hiked every single bluff, clear out to the edge, private property or not. We got permission and accessed that. We were along the top of all of these bluffs all day with still searchers going down along the beaches. With no finds and with investigation continuing, we realized there still were 3 bodies to locate at that stage. Yeah, still Sierra Hart's remains hadn't been located yet, so we were still looking for 3 bodies. We knew in Mendocino County when we can bring in 16 searchers for this operational period 4 and not find anything, that we needed to do further research. So we called the Coast Guard again and said, okay, it's been this long. Where could our floating debris be? The news came back that, well, by now that debris could end up clear down at Point Arena. They gave us the high probability zones, and a lot of it was south of the incident site, the Fort Bragg, McCarraker Beach area, that little hook of land, as well as clear down to Point Arena. At that stage, we knew we needed more resources. That's where we called the mutual aid system. We brought in other counties. So along with our CHP allies and the others that were working the incident with us, we had 7 other mutual aid search and rescue teams. Volunteers, their shirts are slightly different color, but they are also taking a day off of their work to come search. So we had 85 volunteer searchers on that day from Lake County, Sonoma County, Marin County, Contra Costa County, Alameda County. We have all those, plus some specialty teams. Most search teams are a type 2 team. That means hiking over really tough terrain, rocky, slippery stuff. But sometimes that's not even enough. So we brought in type 1 teams from Bay Area Mountain Rescue out of San Mateo County. They rappelled down the cliffs to put boots on those beaches we'd never been. Contra Costa County also had a type 1 team. Sorry, I will. Contra Costa County also brought in their type 1 mountain rescue team. Marin also has some type 1 assets. They rappelled down cliffs for us. On this day, operational period 5, with those 85 searchers, we searched everything down in the Manchester Point Arena area, all the way from up by Westport, above Westport, 2 miles north of the crash site, areas you can only access at low tide, clear down to Fort Bragg's Noyo Harbor. So we covered a whole lot of miles that day. Found a whole lot of debris on the beach. Some of it related, some of it not. No bodies. So,
if you wouldn't mind telling the jury the debris related, just describe in general terms what you found and how you determined it was related.
So search and rescue members are not the ones that determine. Say we find a children's backpack. We'll call. We always have deputies or detectives on the team with us, and they'll send out a detective to look at the evidence and say, yeah, that's a maybe, that's a for sure, or that's a no. And so we'll categorize it and deliver it to whoever it belongs, whether it's the trash can or to evidence. So,
all right.
Always through investigation through the sheriff's office.
I get it. So, but there was some indicia that indicated this ultimately came from that Hart vehicle, is that correct?
There were many pieces of car parts that were a plastic car part that was the same color as the initial interior of the car. So, no, I don't think serial numbers were ever matched up, but it was the same color and near the same area, so.
I do want to say, in addition to this, and I call it a comprehensive search, as I'm looking at these records and hearing the number of teams and people in other counties that came to assist Mendocino County in this, Did you have an understanding that there were also some civilians who were interested in assisting? That in some cases, I understand from a couple of reports, some friends of the Hart family who actually came, and were you in contact with them?
Absolutely. We met up with them a lot. A lot of what we did on the days we were there, if there's someone camping at the beach or in a motorhome up on the cliffs, we would inform them of what we were looking for and ask if they'd seen any debris that was important and ask them to keep their eye out. There was also intentional searchers out there, family, friends. We interacted with them multiple times. Again, Search and Rescue is a volunteer organization. These are people taking a day off, so they were out there 7 full days at very strategic times looking across those beaches. But the people that were camping there the whole period, they were there every day. And as I said, the beach changed out every 6 hours. It was a brand new beach.
As I'm looking at that exhibit, and I believe it's Exhibit 4, I'm seeing dates all the way from the day after this event all the way through and including the 10th of May. So this
Correct.
was, give us an understanding of how long this search took place. And frankly, I'm presuming that it's a continuing search actually.
It is. So up through operational period 5, we were searching with evidence of floating debris and where the float patterns suggest there might have been remains or other clues. The next 2 operational periods were very specific to finds. So operational period 6 is the day after Sierra's remains were located on the beach just north of the crash site. All of us were kind of like, well, that's interesting because all the float patterns say it should be going this way. So again, we searched much of that area in a higher level of detail that we could get to, timed it with the tides. Almost a month later, clear out in May, this is when the other remains were located, Hannah's remains, the foot up further up the beach. Now it's worth noting that that same place where there was a foot had been searched by many civilians time and time again. Our search teams had been over that exact same area 5 times, and the beach literally changes out. So these were driven off of finds of remains.
And let's get back to it. And Sierra, so Sierra, as Deputy Julian indicated, Sierra's remains, she's the one, fair to say, whose body was intact, but had obviously had been in the water for some period of time. Who actually reported that? Do you recall who reported the find?
That is outside of my knowledge.
I see.
I do
All
not
right.
know. We get called by the sheriff, and so once we knew Deputy Julian had responded to that scene, our search and rescue liaisons activated us.
I see. I got you. All right. And the same for the shoe and pants with human remains in the foot, which, so you don't know exactly who reported that?
I don't. I know through hearsay and other conversations that there were some local searchers involved as well as residents up the Hardy Creek area. We don't have any of those maps, but it's basically the creek just north of where Sierra's remains were found and south of where Hannah's foot was found.
All right.
So
Hearsay is okay. We're going to actually have testimony as to that, but just tell us, just for right now, the jury is interested in what information, hearsay, did you hear about how Sierra's remains were found?
I believe they were walking and beach combing right there, out for their morning stroll, early light, to get shells or whatever else is beach combed. And that's when they noticed her right there in the surf. I believe they pulled her up out of the surf so that she would stay there on the beach, and then notified the friend of the family, who then called the sheriff's office, is my understanding.
All right. And that friend of the family, is my understanding, is someone who had come and was regularly searching as well as all the other volunteers.
Correct, and interacting professionally with our search and rescue teams.
All right,
so.
thank you. And with respect to the pants, the shoe, my understanding there were some pants and a shoe, and then later discovered that there was actually
Correct.
some remains still in the shoe. Is that correct?
Correct. I believe a civilian canine was playing on the beach and would not leave that shoe and pants alone, so the resident of that area brought it back knowing that there was a friend of the family interested in clothing items to identify them. At that time, the initial person that found the shoe and pants didn't realize there was a foot in that. That was realized later, but it was because a canine wouldn't leave it alone.
And we will certainly get that testimony in, but hearsay, you can say who, ultimately, that foot was identified as belonging to whom?
I believe Hannah Hart.
Okay. All right. Let's move on next to, and why don't you let me know, should we move on to exhibit?
Well, we've covered most of all of this already, so I think this is pretty much just the written version. You guys are going to get this for later when you're deliberating, so you can not have to memorize what I said. This is the total search area that we covered. So this may look very familiar as operational period 5. That's because operational period 5 encompassed everything else. But it's worth noting that these areas were searched time and time again. We didn't just cover it once and move on. It was covered again and again and again. And even then, later remains would show up on a beach that we had been on half a dozen times.
So with respect to the exhibit below, what is that number?
So this, again, this looks like operational period 5. It is because that's the day we covered the most terrain, but this is everywhere that search and rescue teams searched in the Westport to Fort Bragg to Point Arena, Manchester area.
And down at the bottom, the little tag, what's the number on that?
That number is 5.
All right, so that is Exhibit 5, and Mr. Cheney has testified as to that. So for the record, we have that in, and then that is something also that you're going to have in the jury room, because I'm going to have it published to you and then introduce it into evidence. And you've indicated, is it number 6, the Hart search?
It is.
All right. So you've testified to those particular events, and if you wouldn't mind, take a look at it just for a moment and ensure that you have testified to, I see. So it has the numbers for each search operation period.
It does.
I see. And that is, yes, go ahead.
These will correlate with this chart here, so you can see on the map where those areas are speaking about. You'll also note on here that we've used multiple different resource types. We talked about helicopters. The CHP helicopter was up during the first and second days searching those areas. The Coast Guard's helicopter was up. I believe it was on operational period 3. Don't quote me on that. We also had canines. So search and rescue uses canines. There's primarily 3 types of canines we use in search and rescue. One of them is a trailing canine. If you have my jacket, you could hand it to a trailing dog and they would find me specifically. We didn't have a jacket from any of the missing people, so we used area canines instead. And that is the type of canine that's trained to find any human out there. They just smell human, they run, want to play. So we used area canines for those. Later on in the search, we used a third type, a cadaver dog or a human remains detection dog, HRD. So all those types of dogs were deployed on this, and you'll see those. Especially, we had 6 different canines working on operational period 5, 1 working on op period 2. Other than that, we talked about the different type of search and rescue assets that were used, the advanced type 1 guys that rappel, and girls, that rappel down the cliffs into these very dangerous areas. We used water. Coast Guard actually brought their little cutter out and was getting as close to the shore as they could, but it was still very choppy when they were there. And I think that kind of covers the assets we used out there. Again, op period 5, 85 volunteers from 7 different mutual aid counties. It's really great to see that level of participation.
And as you can understand from Mr. Cheney, the comprehensiveness of this search and the reason why I wanted him to remain here this period of time and let you know the assets and the time that went in. It's very important in an inquest such as this, but particularly when it relates to recoveries over time. So what I'm going to do is ask, I think, a couple more questions. I saw in the reports there was some report, I think by a civilian initially, about a sea lion potentially playing with some human remains. Did you hear of that?
I was at the search on that date, yes.
And can you just testify, just tell the jury what was reported?
So we did have a civilian report that they saw a sea lion in a cove playing with what looked to be human remains. That was on operational period 5 when we had 85 resources there. We obviously redirected a lot of those resources right to the bluffs to watch. Some of those spotting scopes, the ones that were powerful enough to see a mile away and still read words. We never were able to interview the sea lion. And all evidence that we saw, it appeared to be a fish. So best guess, because that's all we really had, it was about 100 yards offshore. And so with spotting scopes, with probably a dozen trained search and rescue eyes on it, the best we could say was it was a fish. We did attempt to put divers in the water. They were not able to locate the sea lion or the fish. So, but made every effort to find that sea lion and what he had.
All right, and Mr. Cheney, is there anything else you'd like to add to your testimony? And that's a question you've heard me ask of everyone. And that's not that I haven't read all these reports. It's simply that sometimes a witness says, well, here's something that I think is important, and I encourage witnesses to provide that if, in fact, there is something that they think is important that perhaps I missed in the questioning. So is there anything else you'd like to add to your testimony here today?
Not at this time, no.
All right, and thank you. And I will also say, because we don't exclude witnesses, if at some point a witness thinks of something that they think is important, they can notify the bailiff or Mr. Biggs, and we can get them back on the stand if we need to do that. So I want to thank you very much. You may step down. What we're going to do at this time is publish each one of these, 4, 5, and 6, and we'll have them introduced into evidence. You can step down if you like. I just want to say for the record, we are very much on track. In fact, we are ahead of the schedule that I had anticipated, and I'm anticipating that this afternoon, well, certainly before this afternoon, we're going to start with Dr. Pizarro, and we'll have Deputy Beck from Washington. Both of those witnesses will be completed, I believe, well before the end of the day, and we'll probably be already starting with, I believe our next witness after that will be Officer Roloff, the mate officer, and I anticipate will even complete his testimony today. So for those of you who are concerned about Monday or things such as that, I think we're well on track for how we're doing. I like to mention that it is no less serious coroner's inquest because we're moving a little faster than we had anticipated. So just to let you know. So anyway, Mr. Biggs, if you would, and this is Exhibit 4, I believe. All right, Exhibit 4 is officially in evidence, and I'll have Mr. Biggs now publish Exhibit 5. And Exhibit 5 is in evidence officially. No, we'll have him publish Exhibit 6, which is really just a kind of an outline of what his testimony was, and you rely on his testimony first and foremost rather than this, but this can be very helpful for you if necessary during your deliberations. All right, Exhibit 6 is in evidence, and I think our timing is pretty good. We're going to take a break, give you a couple extra minutes till 11:15. And as I said, we're right on track. Remember the admonition. Talk about the case among yourselves or among anyone, and don't go in and go on any PDF devices or anything like that, and even so much as looking at overheads of the scene. Please don't do that. All right?